Greetings, one and all, once again to Exploring Arda, a Tolkien centered podcast. And as usual, I am Jackson, your host. And this show is all about going deep into Tolkien's works other than Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. And I'm pretty much starting with the Silmarillion, a pretty well known book among the Tolkien, I guess, universe, possibly. Just like the whole everything that he's created, Silmarillion is pretty big. So I'm starting with that one at least, one that everybody knows, and then I'm going to go on to other ones, sometimes into the history of Middle Earth or just anything that's like not Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and then maybe if by some chance that I'm still doing this many years later, because it's going to take a long time, then I'll probably eventually get to that um, magnificent, massive review. So, but right now it's the start of it, and so far I've made some decent progress. I mean, I'm not even, I'm not, I'm barely, I don't know, a quarter of the way in to the book, so there's a lot to cover. So, with that all being said, well, from the last episode, actually, we talked about chapter 8, and that was all about Melkor's pretty much killing of the trees of Valinor with the help of Ungoliant. So that was a pretty big chapter. So I covered that by itself. And like I said, it was a pretty monumental chapter in the book, very important. And chapter 9, this next one is called Of the Flight of the Noldor. And this is pretty much what happens directly after that. So, with that summary all done and whatnot, we're going to just jump right into the chapter here. So, here we go. After a time, a great concourse gathered about the Ring of Doom, and the Valar sat in shadow, for it was night. The stars of Varda now glimmered overhead, and the air was clear, for the winds of Manwë had driven away the vapors of death, and rolled back the shadows of the sea. Then Yavanna arose and stood upon Azolahar, the green mound. But it was bare now and black, and she laid her hands upon the trees, but they were dead and dark, and each branch that she touched broke and fell lifeless at her feet. Then many voices were lifted in lamentation, and it seemed to those that mourned that they drained to the dregs the cup of woe that Melkor had filled for them. But it was not so. Yavanna spoke before the Valar, saying, "The light of the trees has passed away, and lives now only in the Silmarils of Feanor. Foresighted was he. Even for those who are mightiest under Iluvatar there is some work that they may accomplish once, and once only. The light of the trees I brought into being, and within Ea I can do so never again. Yet had I but a little of that light, I could recall life to the trees ere their roots decay. And then our hurt should be healed, and the malice of Melkor be confounded." Then Manwë spoke and said, "Hearest thou, Feanor, son of Finwë, the words of Yavanna? Wilt thou grant what she would ask?" There was a long silence, but Feanor answered no word. Then Tulkas cried, "Speak, O Noldo, yea or nay, but who shall deny Yavanna? And did not the light of the Silmarils come from her work in the beginning?" But Aue the Maker said, "Be not hasty. We ask a greater thing than thou knowest. Let him have peace yet a while." But Feanor spoke then, and cried bitterly, "For the less even as for the greater, there is some deed that he may accomplish but once only, and in that deed his heart shall rest. It may be that I can unlock my jewels, but never again shall I make their like. And if I must break them, I shall break my heart, and I shall be slain, first of all the Eldar in Aman." "Not the first," said Mondos, but they did not understand his word. And again there was silence, while Feanor brooded in the dark. It seemed to him that he was beset in a ring of enemies, and the words of Melkor returned to him, saying that the Silmarils were not safe if the Valar would possess them. "And he is not Vala as are they," said his thought. Oh, sorry, a little confusing there. And does he not understand their hearts? Yea, a thief shall reveal thieves." Then he cried aloud, "This thing I will not do of free will. But if the Valar will constrain me, then shall I know indeed that Melkor is of their kindred." Then Mandos said, "Thou hast spoken." And Nienna arose and went up to Azolahar, and cast back her grey hood, and with her tears washed away the defilements of Ungoliant. And she sang in mourning for the bitterness of the world and the marring of Arda. So, A lot to read here right away, actually. Mostly because it's just dialogue for half of it. And yeah, this is like directly after Melkor's spilling of darkness, pretty much, and the corruption um, of the darkness and whatnot. And pretty much the Valar are saying that the Silmarils have the light of the trees and the only light of the trees. And Feanor's like, yeah, okay, well, I get that, but I'm never ever gonna make something like this ever again, and it's gonna break my heart if I give it over to you guys because it's just gonna be completely destroyed. So, yeah, I mean, it's also like at this point, that's the whole light and dark side of Feanor is that yes, he created the Silmarils with the light of the trees, but also he covets them very much, like personally. He doesn't even want to bother giving life to other people. That's practically what the trees of Valinor did. So yeah, it's just a lot of back and forth so far, and it sucks to kind of see that. So we'll go back to the story here. But even as Nienna mourned, there came messengers from Formenos, and they were Noldor, and bore new tidings of evil. For they told how a blind darkness came northward, and in the midst walked some power for which there was no name, and the darkness issued from it. But Melkor also was there, and he came to the house of Feanor, and there he slew Finwë, king of the Noldor, before his doors, and spilled the first blood in the blessed realm. For Finwë alone had not fled the horror of the dark, and they told that Melkor had broken the stronghold of Formenos and taken all the jewels of the Noldor that were hoarded in that place, and the Silmarils were gone. Then Feanor rose, and lifting up his hand before Manwë, he cursed Melkor, naming him Morgoth, the black foe of the world, and by that name only was he known to the Eldar ever after. And he cursed also the summons of Manwë, and the hour in which he came to Tanaquetzal, thinking in the madness of his rage and grief that had sorry, excuse me, that he had been at Formenos, his strength would have availed more than to be slain also, as Melkor had purposed. Then Feanor ran from the ring of doom and fled into the night, for his father was dearer to him than the light of Valinor, or the peerless works of his hands. And who among sons of elves or of men have held their fathers of greater worth? Many there grieved for the anguish of Feanor, but his loss was not his alone. And Yavanna wept by the mound, in fear that the darkness would swallow the last rays of the light of Valinor forever. For though the Valar did not yet understand fully what had befallen, they perceived that Melkor had called upon some aid that came from beyond Arda. The Silmarils had passed away, and all one it may seem whether Feanor had said yea or nay to Yavanna. Yet had he said yea at the first, before the tidings came from Formenos, it may be that his after deeds would have been other than they were. But now the doom of the Noldor drew near. Yeah, so it's the whole thing of Feanor kind of tossing back and forth in his thoughts, but eventually he says no, he's not going to do it, and then especially because his father was killed by, well, now it's Morgoth, so from now on it's actually going to be Morgoth. Pretty cool thing that actually a little note here too is that immediately after it just switches right to Morgoth, and then you just instead of Melkor, it's just Morgoth from now on. So interesting to kind of note that it's a really cool, just I don't know, a literary thing that Tolkien did with switching the name like immediately as soon as Feanor cursed him and called him Morgoth. Literally since that sentence, just on Morgoth. So just really cool. But pretty much that's why Feanor pretty much turns away from the Valar because he wants to get back the Silmarils because pretty much that I guess that reminds him of his father because well actually it would be more like revenge, a revenge against Melkor or sorry Morgoth now. Now I'm gonna have to get used to saying Morgoth. So we'll just go right back into the story. How about that? Yeah, there you go. Meanwhile, Morgoth, escaping from the pursuit of the Valar, came to the wastes of Ahriman. This land lay northward between the mountains of the Pelori and the great sea, as Avathar lay to the south. But Ahriman was a wider land, and between the shores and the mountains were barren plains, ever colder as the ice drew nearer. Through this region Morgoth and Ungoliant passed in haste, and so came through the great mists of Oyamure to the Helcaraxe, where, where the strait between Eremen and Middle-earth was filled with grinding ice, and he crossed over and came back at last to the north of the outer lands. Together they went on, for Morgoth could not elude Ungoliant, and her cloud was still about him, and all her eyes were upon him, and they came to those lands that lay north of the Firth of Drengist. Now Morgoth was drawing near to the ruins of Angband, where his great western stronghold had been, and Ungoliant perceived his hope and knew that here he would seek to escape from her, and she stayed him, demanding that he fulfill his purpose. Black heart, she said, I have done thy bidding, but I hunger still. What wouldst thou have more? Said Morgoth. Dost thou desire all the world for thy belly? I did not vow to give thee that. I am its lord. Not so much, said Ungoliant, but thou hast a great treasure from Formenos. I will have all that. Yea, with both hands thou shalt give it. Then perforce, yeah, I said that. Morgoth surrendered to her the gems that he bore with him, one by one and grudgingly, and she devoured them, and their beauty perished from the world. Huger and darker yet grew Ungoliant, but her lust was unsated. With one hand thou givest, she said, with the left only. Open thy right hand. In his right hand Morgoth held close the Silmarils, and though they were locked in a crystal casket, they had begun to burn him, and his hand was clenched in pain, but he would not open it. Nay, he said, thou hast had thy due. Excuse me. For with my power that I put into thee thy work was accomplished. I need thee no more. These things thou shalt not have nor see. I name them unto myself forever. But Ungoliant had grown great, and he less by the power that had gone out of him. And she arose against him, and her cloud closed about him, and she enmeshed him in a web of clinging thongs to strangle him. Interesting image there. Then Then Morgoth sent forth a terrible cry that echoed in the mountains. Therefore that region was called Lamath, for the echoes of his voice dwelt there ever after, so that any who cried aloud in that land awoke them, and all the waste between the hills and the sea was filled with a clamor as of voices in anguish. Wow, something stuck in my throat here tonight. Oof. I bet that's nice for the episode. So actually I'm going to stop right here before we get a little further into this. Is that it's the whole thing of Morgoth and Ungoliant, obviously, with the whole dialogue. Now that we get more dialogue, it's a little bit more clear picture, especially for you listeners. Is that pretty much Morgoth gives Ungoliant all the gems besides the Silmarils, and pretty much all of those jewels, gems, and whatnot that were made by Feanor are pretty much gone forever. But Morgoth's like, no, these Silmarils are way too important, and definitely not going to hand those over. So, and Ungoliant pretty much punishes him by surrounding him with like the deepest, darkest actual darkness that he does not like. Even and this is Morgoth, so that's why I'm saying Ungoliant is like worse than Morgoth. Like she is made out of pure darkness, and that's pretty much all. That's kind of like her existence is devouring the light, so that's kind of terrifying. So let's just go back into the story here. The cry of Morgoth in that hour was the greatest and most dreadful that was ever heard in the northern world. The mountains shook and the earth trembled, and rocks were riven asunder. Deep in forgotten places that cry was heard, far beneath the ruined halls of Angband, in vaults to which the Valar in the haste of their assault had not descended. Balrogs lurked still, awaiting ever the return of their lord. And now swiftly they arose. Passing over Hithlum, they came to Lamath as a tempest of fire. With their whips of flame they smote asunder the webs of Ungoliant, and she quailed and turned to flight. Belching black vapors to cover her, and fleeing from the north, she went down into Beleriand, and dwelt beneath arid Gorgoroth, in that dark valley that was after called Dungortheb, the valley of dreadful death, because of the horror that she bred there. For other foul creatures of spider form had dwelt there since the days of the delving of Angband, and she mated with them and devoured them. And even after Ungoliant herself departed and went whither she would into the forgotten south of the world, her offspring abode there and wove their hideous webs. Of the fate of Ungoliant no tale tells, yet some have said that she ended long ago, when in her uttermost famine she devoured herself at last. So, Yeah, that is I think like the last chapter and then this part of the chapter is like the darkest dark. um the whole thing of pretty much Ungoliant starving herself is very tragic. Like it's definitely tragic anyway, but like just like actually her devouring herself because there's nothing else really is, I don't know, I just think that's a pretty scary image as well. And obviously the whole thing of Ered Gorgoroth, which kind of reminds me of the plains of Gorgoroth in Mordor and whatnot. And you know who's in Mordor? Shelob, and you know Shelob is from Mongolian, so a lot of evil stuff around there. And it's no wonder Sauron pretty much had Shelob pretty much almost as like a guardian to his lands because it just makes sense. So back to the story here. And thus the fear of Yavanna that the Silmarils would be swallowed up and fall into nothingness did not come to pass. But they remained in the power of Morgoth, and he, being freed, gathered again all his servants that he could find, and came to the ruins of Angband. There he delved anew his vast vaults and dungeons, and above their gates he reared the threefold peaks of Thangorodrim. A great reek of dark smoke was ever wreathed about them. There countless became the hosts of his beasts and his demons, and the race of the orcs, bred long before, grew and multiplied in the bowels of the earth. Dark now fell the shadow on Beleriand, as is told hereafter. But in Angband Morgoth forged for himself a great crown of iron, and he called himself King of the World. In a token of this he set the Silmarils in his crown. His hands were burned black by the touch of those hallowed jewels, and black they remained ever after. Nor was he ever free from the pain of the burning and the anger of his pain. That crown he never took from his head, though its weight became a deadly weariness. Never but once only did he depart for a while secretly from his domain in the north. Seldom indeed did he leave the deep places of his fortress, but governed his armies from his northern throne, and once only also did he himself wield weapon, while his realm lasted. Yeah, so pretty much Morgoth is setting up his own personal fort, and pretty much names it Thangorodrim, which is the massive mountainous peaks, which definitely makes sense because I mean, hey, like it's an it's an evil lord, and of course he's gonna raise mountains and call it his own and start like his own like evil army. Totally makes sense, actually. So he's pretty much getting ready for the oncoming attacks that will happen. Like he knows it has to happen. Of the Valars sending pretty much everything they can against him. One, to just go against him, and then two, to reclaim the Silmarils. So back to here. For now, more than in the days of Autumno, ere his pride was humbled, his hatred devoured him, and in the domination of the servants and the inspiring of them with lust of evil he spent his spirit. None the less, his majesty as one of the Valar long remained, though turned to terror, and before his face all save the mightiest sank into a dark pit of fear. Now when it was known that Morgoth had escaped from Valinor and pursuit was unavailing, the Valar remained long sated in darkness in the Ring of Doom, and the Maiar and the Vanyar stood beside them and wept. But the Noldor, for the most part, returned to Tirion and mourned for the darkening of their fair city. Through the dim ravine of the Calcaria fogs drifted in from the shadowy seas and mantled its towers, and the lamp of the Mindon burned pale in the gloom. Then suddenly Feanor appeared in the city, and called on all to come into the high court of the king upon the summit of Tuna. But the doom of banishment that had been laid upon him was not yet lifted, and he rebelled against the Valar. A great multitude gathered swiftly, therefore, to hear what he would say, and the hill and all the stairs and streets that climbed upon it were lit with the light of many torches that each bore in hand. Feanor was a master of words, and his tongue had great power over hearts when he would use it. And that night he made a speech before the Noldor, which they ever remembered. Fierce and fell words. Oh, sorry. Fierce and fell were his words. There you go. And filled with anger and pride. And hearing them, the Noldor was stirred to madness. His wrath and his hate were given most to Morgoth, and yet well nigh all that he said came from the very lies of Morgoth himself. And he was distraught with grief for the slaying of his father, and with anguish for the rape of the Silmarils. He claimed now the kingship of all the Noldor since Finwë was dead, and he scorned the decrees of the Valar. So, yeah, pretty much Feanor is going completely against the Valar because he doesn't really fulfill his full sentence and he pretty much doesn't care anymore. And he's like, okay, guys, listen to what I have to say. So, and actually, there's some dialogue right after here, so we'll see what he has to say. Why, O people of the Noldor, he cried, why should we longer serve the jealous Valar, who cannot keep us, nor even their own realm secure from their enemy? And though he be now their foe, are not they and he of one kin? Vengeance calls me hence, but even were it otherwise, I would not dwell longer in the same land with the kin of my father's slayer and of the thief of my treasure. Yet I am not the only valiant in this valiant people. And have ye not all lost your king? And what else have ye not lost, cooped here in a narrow land between the mountains and the sea? Here once was light, and the Valar begrudged to Middle-earth, but now dark levels all. Shall we mourn here deedless for ever, a shadow folk, mist-haunting, dropping vain tears in the thankless sea? Or shall we return to our home? In Cuivennen sweet ran the waters under unclouded stars, and wide lands lay about, where free people might walk. There they lie still and await us who in our folly forsook them. Come away, let the cowards keep this city. Thus. Long he spoke, and ever he urged the Noldor to follow him, and by their own prowess to win freedom in great realms in the lands of the East, before it was too late. For he echoed the lies of Melkor, that the Valar had cozened them and would hold them captive, so that men might rule in Middle-earth. Many of the Eldar heard then for the first time of the aftercomers. Fair shall the end be, he cried, though long and hard shall be the road. Say farewell to bondage, but say farewell also to ease. Say farewell to the weak, say farewell to your treasures. More still shall we make. Journey light, but bring with you your swords, for we will go further than Arome, endure longer than Tolkas. We will never turn back from pursuit. After Morgoth to the ends of the earth. War shall he have and hatred undying. But when we have conquered and have regained the Silmarils, then we and we alone shall be lords of the unsullied light, and masters of the bliss and beauty of Arda. No other race shall oust us. So, yeah. That's pretty much all that he says. It's more of just like pretty much trying to rally all of the Noldor here, of like saying the Valar are here, can't even protect themselves, can't even protect their land. Why should we stay here when the other lands where we originally came from was already blissful and great and amazing? So we should go over there, and not just that, but we should make new things for ourselves and challenge Morgoth, and then kill Morgoth, and then take the Silmarils for ourselves, and then just be leaders of Arda. So, and who does that sound like? I don't know. It's a little bit like Morgoth to me. I don't know about that. Feanor's up to some sketchy stuff here. So, and it kind of goes on here. So we'll go right back to the story here. Then Feanor swore a terrible oath. His 7 sons leapt straightway to his side and took the selfsame vow together, and red as blood shone their drawn swords in the glare of the torches. They swore an oath which none shall break, and none should take, by the name even of Iluvatar, calling the everlasting dark upon them if they kept it not. And Manwë they named in witness, and Varda, and the hallowed mountain of Tanaquetzal, vowing to pursue with vengeance and hatred to the ends of the world Vala, demon, elf, or man as yet unborn, or any creature great or small, good or evil, that time should bring forth unto the end of days, whoso should hold or take or keep a Silmaril from their possession. Thus spoke Maedhros and Maglor and Celegorm, Curufin and Caranthir, Amrod and Amrys, princes of the Noldor, and many quailed to hear the dread words. For so sworn, good or evil, an oath may not be broken, and it shall pursue oath-keeper and oath-breaker to the world's end. Fingolfin and Turgon his son therefore spoke against Feanor, and fierce words awoke, so that once again wrath came near to the edge of swords. But Finarfin spoke softly, as was his wont, and sought to calm the Noldor, persuading them to pause and ponder ere deeds were done that could not be undone. And Orodreth alone of his sons spoke in like manner. Finrod was with Turgon, his friend, but Galadriel, the only woman of the Noldor, to stand that day, tall and valiant among the contented princes, was eager to be gone. No oaths she swore, but the words of Feanor concerning Middle-earth had kindled in her heart, for she yearned to see the wide unguarded lands and to rule there a realm at her own will. Of like mind with Galadriel was Fingolfin's son, being moved also by Feanor's words, though he loved them little. And with Fingon stood as they ever did Angrod and Aegnor, sons of Finarfin, but these held their peace and spoke not against their fathers. At length, after long debate, Feanor prevailed, and the greater part of the Noldor there assembled he set aflame with the desire of new things and strange countries. Therefore, when Finarfin spoke yet again for heed and delay, a great shout went up, "Nay, let us be gone!" And straightway Feanor and his sons began to prepare for the marching forth. All right, so pretty much, Feanor sways most of the Noldor over to his side, and one of them actually is Galadriel, which we all know in Lord of the Rings, kind of a big deal in the story, and because she's really powerful, and she's also very, very old. So now you can see where Galadriel first shows up in the timeline, all the way to the beginning of pretty much the Silmarils, and I think later on, Feanor and Galadriel also have a little um, moment of deciding. I can't really. That's the thing. It's all future stuff, and don't want to really spoil anything right now. But yeah, so a lot of people are like yes and no. There's either one side or the other. There's no like maybes. That's kind of what I'm getting at here. So, but now they are leaving. So let's get back to the story. Little foresight could there be for those who dared to take so dark a road, yet all was done in overhaste, for Feanor drove them on, fearing lest in the cooling of their hearts his words should wane and other counsels yet prevail. And for all his proud words, he did not forget the power of the Valar. But from Valimar no message came, and Manwë was silent. He would not yet either forbid or hinder Feanor's purpose, for the Valar were aggrieved that they were charged with evil intent to the Eldar, or that any were held captive by them against their will. Now they watched and waited, for they did not yet believe that Feanor could hold the host of the Noldor to his will. And indeed, when Feanor began the marshalling of the Noldor for their setting out, then at once dissension arose. For though he had brought the assembly in a mind to depart, by no means all were of a mind to take Feanor as king. Greater love was given to Fingolfin and his sons and his household, and the most part of the dwellers in Tirion refused to renounce him, if he would go with them, and thus, at the last, as two divided hosts of the Noldor set forth upon their bitter road. Feanor and his following were in the van, but the greater host came behind under Fingolfin, and he marched against his wisdom, because Fingon his son so urged him, and because he would not be sundered from his people that were eager to go, nor leave them to the rash counsels of Feanor. Nor did he forget the words before the throne of Manwë. With Fingolfin went Finarfin also, and for like reasons, but most loath was he to depart. And of all the Noldor and Valinor, who were grown now to a great people, but one tithe refused to take the road, some for the love that they bore to the Valar, and to Aule not least. Some of the love of Tirion and the many things that they had made, none for fear of peril by the way. Yeah, there's already a group that was led by Feanor at first, but then they're like, no, he's not our king. We're not gonna go, we're not gonna bend the knee to Feanor. We're not gonna do any of the praise and worship to him. He only made us choose to move, and that's it. So that's kind of like a basic summary of what all happened, and then Fingolfin, although he is following Feanor's lead here, he's still kind of against who he is and his hope of when he returns to Middle Earth, pretty much. So yeah. So now back to the story again. But even as the trumpets sang, and Feanor issued from the gates of Tirion, a messenger came at last from Manwë, saying, "Against the folly of Feanor shall be set my counsel only. Go not forth, for the hour is evil, and your road leads to sorrow that ye do not foresee. No aid will the Valar lend you in this quest, but neither will they hinder you. For this ye shall know, as ye came hither freely, freely shall ye depart. But thou, Feanor, Finwë's son, by thine oath art exiled. The lies of Melkor thou shalt unlearn in bitterness. Vala he is, thou sayest, then thou hast sworn in vain, for none of the Valar canst thou overcome now or ever within the halls of Ea, not through Eru, whom thou namest had made thee thrice greater than thou art. Apologies, because I can't really talk Old English style very well. At least not yet. We'll see at the end of this book, actually. Back to it again here. But Feanor laughed, and spoke not to the herald, but to the Noldor, saying, So, then will this valiant people send forth the heir of their king alone into banishment with his sons only, and return to their bondage? But if any will come with me, I say to them, Is sorrow foreboded to you? But in Aman we have seen it. In Aman we have come through bliss to woe. The other now we will try, through sorrow, to find joy or freedom at the least. Then turning to the herald, he cried, Say this to Manwe Sulimo, High King of Arda. If Feanor cannot overthrow Morgoth, at least he delays not to assail him, and sits not idle in grief. And it may be that Eru has set me in a fire greater than thou knowest. Such hurt at the least I will do to the foe of the Valar, that even the mighty in the Ring of Doom shall wonder to hear it. Yea, in the end they shall follow me. Farewell. In that hour the voice of Feanor grew so great and so potent that even the herald of the Valar bowed before him, as one full answered, and departed, and the Noldor were overruled. Therefore they continued their march, and the house of Feanor hastened before them along the coast of Elendë. Not once did they turn their eyes back to the Deering of the green hill of Tuna. Slower and less eagerly came the host of Fingolfin after them. Of those, Fingon was the most foremost. But at the rear went Finarfin and Finrod, and many of the noblest and wisest of the Noldor. And often they looked behind them to see their fair city, until the lamp of the Mindon Eldalieva was lost in the night. More than any others of the exiles, they carried thence memories of the bliss they had forsaken, and some even of the things that they had made there they took with them, a solace and a burden on the road. Right, yeah, so we get like the pretty much the point where Feanor chooses of like, okay, well, if you go any further, the Valar are gonna completely forget you. Well, maybe not forget. I wouldn't say forget. They're not gonna help you out, and you also can't come back like ever. Like Feanor is pretty much banished from Valinor, which is terrible, but it's Feanor, and he's burning with hatred, and he really doesn't care. He pretty flat out like denies the Valar, and well, pretty much is like, well, listen, if the Valar can't help us in Valinor, they're not going to help us out here. Uh, that's about it, pretty much. So, but like all of his cutting words, even the messengers, just like in respect of him, and then it also kind of puts respect in him of all the Noldor who are among him. So I guess this moment is kind of almost a win-win situation for Feanor, especially like personally. So I don't know, just interesting viewpoint. So back to the story here. Now Feanor led the Noldor northward because his oh my goodness, sorry guys, because his first purpose was to follow Morgoth. Moreover, Tuna beneath Tenoquetzal was set nigh to the girdle of Arda, and there the great sea was immeasurably wide, whereas ever northward the sundering seas grew narrower, as the wasteland of Aramen and the coast of Middle-earth drew together. But as the mind of Feanor cooled and took counsel, he perceived overlate that all these great companies would never overcome the long leagues to the north, nor cross the seas at the last, save with the aid of ships. Yet it would need long time and toil to build so great a fleet, even were there any among the Noldor skilled in that craft. He resolved now, therefore, to persuade the Teleri, ever friends to the Noldor, to join with them, and in his rebellion he thought that thus the bliss of Valinor might be further diminished, and his power for war upon Morgoth be increased. He hastened them to Alqualande, and spoke to the Teleri as he had spoken before in Tirion. But the Teleri were unmoved by aught that he would say. They were grieved indeed at the going of their kinsfolk and long friends, but would rather dissuade them than aid them, and no ship would they lend nor help in the building, against the will of Valar. As for themselves, they desired now no other home but the strands of Eldamar, and no other lord than Olwe, prince of Alqualande. And he had never lent ear to Morgoth, nor welcomed him to his land, and he trusted still that Ulmo and the other great among the Valar would redress the hurts of Morgoth, and that the night would pass yet to a new dawn. Yeah, and I'll stop actually right here, pretty much just to make a little quick summary. Is that Feanor realizes that the company like of the Noldor that he's leading probably won't they probably won't all make it through the Helcaraxe, the Granding Ice, because it is so far north and it's freezing and it's terrible. It's like the worst path to take to Middle Earth. So it was like, oh wait, we got our friends the Teleri. Let's ask them about boats. And they're just like, we don't really like the way that you're kind of just leaving the Valar. So no. That's pretty much short version of what's happening here. So we'll go back into it here. Then Feanor grew wrathful, for he still feared delay, and hotly he spoke to Olwe. You renounced your friendship even in the hour of our need, yet you were glad indeed to receive our aid when you came at last to these shores. Faint-hearted loiterers, and well-nigh empty-handed, in huts on the beaches would you be dwelling still, had not the Noldor carved out your haven and toiled upon your walls. But Olwe answered, We renounce no friendship, but it may be the part of a friend to rebuke a friend's folly. And when the Noldor welcomed us and gave us aid, otherwise then you spoke. In the land of Aman we were to dwell forever, as brothers whose houses stand side by side. But as for our white ships, those you gave us not. We learned not that the craft from the Noldor, but from the lords of the sea, and the white timbers we wrought with our own hands, and the white sails were woven by our wives and our daughters. Therefore we will neither give them nor sell them for any league of friendship. For I say to you, Feanor, son of Finwë, these are to us as the gems of the Noldor, the work of our hearts, whose like we shall not make again. Thereupon Feanor left him and sat in dark thought beyond the walls of Alqualande, until his host was assembled. When he judged that his strength was enough, he went to the haven of the swans, and began to man the ships that were anchored there and to take them away by force. But the Teleri withstood him, and cast many of the Noldor into the sea. Then swords were drawn, and a bitter fight was fought upon the ships, and about the lamplit quays and piers of the. Oh, sorry, I think that's keys. I think that's how you pronounce it, not quays. That's my bad, guys. Again, night after night, I just cannot talk. I think that's keys. About the lamplit quays and piers of the haven, and even upon the great arch of its gate. Thrice the people of Feanor were driven back, and many were slain upon either side. But the vanguard of the Noldor were succoured by Fingon with the foremost of the host of Fingolfin, who coming up found a battle joined in their own kin falling, and rushed in before they knew rightly the cause of the quarrel. Some thought indeed that the Teleri had sought to waylay the march of the Noldor at the bidding of the Valar. Thus at last the Teleri were overcome, and a great part of the mariners that dwelt in Alqualande were quickly slain. For the Noldor were become fierce and desperate, and the Teleri had less strength, and were armed for the most part but with slender bows. Then the Noldor drew away their white ships, and manned their oars as best they might, and rowed them north along the coast. And Olwe called upon Osse, but he came not, for it was not permitted by the Valar that the flight of the Noldor should be hindered by force. But Uinen wept for the mariners of the Teleri, and the sea rose in wrath against the slayers, so that many of the ships were wrecked, and those in them drowned. Of the kinslaying of Alqualande, more is told in that lament which is named Noldolante, the fall of the Noldor, that Maglor made ere he was lost. Yeah, so another tragedy unfolds, pretty much. And this is another poor decision made by Feanor, of course. Pretty much, he loses like the argument, even though he has very cutting words. It's like one of his few losses as a charismatic guy. Normally he kind of gets his way, kind of. And this time he lost, so he gets really angered, and he's like, you know what? We're taking the ships by force. But the Teleri are like, no, 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 those are like your gems. It's our prize, and this is like what we do. But he's like, nope, too bad. And then a big fight happens, and there's so much killing that, yeah, it's just a big tragedy. And yeah, and then obviously, I'll say one of the lords of the sea under Ulmo's, I don't know, guidance, servitude, whatnot. He kind of just like, well, I can't do anything, specifically because of the whole thing of the Noldor not being hindered. But Luinen's like, nah, too bad. I'm gonna do something sneaky. So, and that's pretty much what happens. So, the slaying of the kinsfolk, pretty much, and that's also a huge deal as well because it's like Feanor's betrayal of his own kind, of elven kind. So, it's a big deal for Feanor. So we'll go back to the story here. Nonetheless, the greater part of the Noldor escaped, and when the storm was past they held on their course, some by ship and some by land, but the way was long, and ever more evil as they went forward. After they had marched for a great while in the unmeasured night, they came at length to the northern confines of the guarded realm, upon the borders of the empty waste of Araman, which were mountainous and cold. There they beheld suddenly a dark figure standing high upon a rock that looked down upon the shore. Some say that it was Mandos himself, and no lesser herald of Manwë. And they heard a loud voice, solemn and terrible, that bade them stand and give ear. Then all halted and stood still, and from end to end of the host of the Noldor the voice was heard, speaking the curse and prophecy, which is called the prophecy of the North, and the doom of the Noldor. Much is foretold in dark words, which the Noldor understood not, until the woes indeed after befell them. But all heard the curse that was uttered upon those that would not stay nor seek the doom and pardon of the Valar. Yeah, actually, before this is going to be a bunch of bunch of dialogue here, and pretty much, yeah. Long story short is that they finally get to land on the other side on the shore, and they see a really big figure, and the figure speaks the doom of the Noldor. So here it is. Tears unnumbered ye shall shed, and the Valar will fence Valinor against you and shut you out, so that not even the echo of your lamentation shall pass over the mountains. On the house of Feanor the wrath of the Valar lieth from the west unto the uttermost east, and upon all that will follow them it shall be laid also. Their oath shall drive them, and yet betray them, and ever snatch away the very treasures that they have sworn to pursue. To evil end shall all things turn that they begin well, and by treason of kin unto kin, and the fear of treason, and shall this come to pass, the dispossessed shall they be forever. Ye have spilled the blood of your kindred unrighteously, and have stained the land of Aman. For blood ye shall render blood, and beyond Aman ye shall dwell in death's shadow. For though Eru appointed you to die not in Ea, and no sickness may assail you, yet slain ye may be, and slain ye shall be, by weapon and by torment and by grief, and your houseless spirits shall come then to Mandos. There long shall ye abide and yearn for your bodies, and find little pity, though all whom ye have slain should entreat for you. And those that endure in Middle-earth and come not to Mandos shall grow weary of the world, as with a great burden, and shall wane, and become as shadows of regret, before the younger race that cometh after. Valar have spoken. Then many quailed, but Feanor hardened his heart and said, We have sworn, and not lightly. This oath we will keep. We are threatened with many evils, and treason not least. But one thing is not said, that we shall suffer from cowardice, from cravens, or the fear of cravens. Therefore I say that we will go on, and this doom I add. The deeds that we shall do shall be the matter of song until the last days of Arda. Yeah, so that's bad news. Uh, really bad. I think it's kind of bad news is that the Valar is just like, okay, now that you're here, guess what? You guys are pretty much cursed. That's kind of what I get out of it, in a way. Pretty much that, yes, you are here and you are still living, and although you may die by sickness or weapons, that even in Mandos, you're going to be suffering. So, and that's pretty bad because that's the afterlife, guys. But Feanor's like, no, don't worry, don't worry. Like, even when we're living, we're not going to be suffering from being a coward, right? And all the elves are just kind of like, yeah, sure, but I mean, they're never going to come back to Valinor ever, and the Valar are completely against them. It's it's bad news, and Feanor just doesn't care. He's just so selfish and just wants his Silmarils back. So he wants his rocks back, guys. Feanor wants his rocks back. All right, enough silliness here. Back to the story. But in that hour Finarfin forsook the march and turned back, being filled with grief and with bitterness against the house of Feanor, because of his friendship with Olwe of Alqualande. And many of his people went with him, retracing their steps in sorrow, until they beheld once more the far beam of the Mindon upon Tuna, still shining in the night, and so came at last to Valinor. There they received the pardon of the Valar, and Finarfin was set to rule the remnant of the Noldor in the Blessed Realm. But his sons were not with him, for they would not forsake the sons of Fingolfin. And all Fingolfin's folk went forward still, feeling the constraint of their kinship and the will of Feanor, and fearing the face to face the doom of the Valar, since not all of them had been guiltless of the kinslaying at Alqualande. Moreover, Fingon and Turgon were bold and fiery of heart, and loath to abandon any task to which they had put their hands until the bitter end, if bitter it must be. So the main host held on, and swiftly the evil that was foretold began its work. So yeah, another quick thing. I'm trying to kind of finish this up before an hour passes. Yeah, pretty much Finarfin kind of realizes that all of this is actually terrible, and he comes back to Valinor with a few of his own people, and the Valar are just like, okay, well, it's not because of you, mostly it's because of Feanor, so they pretty much forgive them. So then the rest of the Noldor are pretty much just too terrified to come back to Valinor because of the wrath of the Valar, which makes total sense. So, back to it here. Noldor came at last far into the north of Arda, and they saw the first teeth of the ice that floated in the sea, and knew that they were drawing high to the Helcaraxe. For between the land of Aman, that in the north curved eastward, and the can't read again, and the east shores of Endor, which is Middle Earth, that bore westward, there was a narrow strait, through which the chill waters of the encircling sea and the waves of Belagare flowed together. And there were vast fogs and mists of deathly cold, and the sea streams were filled with clashing hills of ice, and the grinding of ice deep sunken. Such was the Helcaraxe, and there were none yet had dared to tread save the Valar only, and Ungoliant. Therefore Feanor halted, and the Noldor debated what course they should now take. But they began to suffer anguish from the cold, and the clinging mists through which no gleam of star could pierce. And many repented of the road and began to murmur, especially those that followed Fingolfin, cursing Feanor and naming him as the cause of all the woes of the Eldar. But Feanor, knowing all that was said, took counsel with his sons, and two courses only they saw to escape from Eremen and come into Endor, by the straits or by ship. But the Helcaraxe they deemed impassable, whereas the ships were too few. Many had been lost upon their long journey, and there remained now not enough to bear across the great host together. Yet none were willing to abide upon the western coast, while others were ferried first. Already the fear of treachery was awake among the Noldor. Therefore it came to the hearts of Feanor and his sons to seize all the ships, and to part suddenly, for they had retained the mastery of the fleet since the battle of the Haven, and it was manned only by those who had fought there and were bound to Feanor. And as though it came at his call, there sprang up a wind from the northwest, and Feanor slipped away secretly with all whom he deemed true to him, and went aboard, and put out to sea, and left Fingolfin and Eremen. And since the sea was there narrow, steering east and somewhat south, he passed over without loss. And first of all the Noldor set foot once more upon the shores of Middle-earth. And the landing of Feanor was at the mouth of the firth, which was called Drengus, and ran into Dor Lomin. But when they landed, Maedhros, the eldest of his sons, and on a time the friend of Fingon, ere Morgoth's lies came between, spoke to Feanor, saying, Now what ships and rowers will you spare to return, and whom shall they bear hither first? Fingon the valiant? Then Feanor laughed as one Fey, and he cried, "None and none. What I have left behind I count now no loss. Needless baggage on the road it has proved. Let those that cursed my name curse me still, and wind and yeah, and wind their way back to the cages of the Valar. Let the ships burn." Then Maedhros stood alone. Oh my goodness! Then Maedhros alone stood aside, but Feanor caused fire to be set to the long white ships of the Teleri. So in that place, which was called Loskar, at the outlet of the Firth of Drengist, ended the fairest of vessels that ever sailed the sea, in a great burning, bright and terrible. And Fingolfin and his people saw the light afar off, red beneath the clouds, and they knew that they were betrayed. This was the first fruits of the kinslaying and the doom of the Noldor. And I'm going to keep reading because I got one paragraph left. We're almost there, guys. It's alright. Then Fingolfin, seeing that Feanor had left him to perish in Eärendil or return in shame to Valinor, was filled with bitterness. But he desired now as never before to come by some way to Middle-earth and meet Feanor again. And he and his host wandered long in misery, but their valor and endurance grew with hardship, for they were a mighty people, the elder children undying of Eru Ilúvatar, but new come from the blessed realm, and not yet weary with the weariness of earth. The fire of their hearts was young, and led by Fingolfin and his sons, and by Finrod and Galadriel, they dared to pass into the bitterest north. And finding no other way, they endured at last the terror of the Helcaraxe and the cruel hills of ice. Few of the deeds of the Noldor thereafter surpassed that desperate crossing in hardihood or woe. Then Elenwe, the wife of Turgon, was lost, and many others perished also, and it was with a lessened host that Fingolfin set afoot at last upon the outer lands. Small love for Feanor or his sons had those that marched at last behind him, and blew their trumpets in Middle-earth at the first rising of the moon. Yes, all right, we made it, guys. Oh man, that was a long, long, long chapter. So yeah, that's pretty much why I only wanted to do one episode for that one. Yeah, pretty much. At the end of this chapter, it's the whole thing of the burning of the ships, which is another big stamp of Feanor's cruel acts, cruel and selfish acts. He pretty much kind of turns Fingolfin away because they pretty much don't believe in him in a way, and he's just been going down the wrong path, so he just keeps choosing the wrong things, and he's just like, hey, like, we've been outcasted by the Valar, who cares? So he just keeps going. Unfortunately, that's just kind of how Feanor is now that he's pretty much out of Valinor. So he's in exile, so he just does whatever he wants. And Fingolfin is definitely mad at him, but despite all of that anger and whatnot, he still wants to go into Middle-earth. Not, I mean, specifically, yes, to meet Feanor again, but also just to have his own dominion, I think, as well as Galadriel, as was mentioned earlier. So, and now that they're in Middle-earth, and that's pretty much the end of chapter 9. So, we are getting a bit further. Not a whole lot, but I mean, I also don't have a whole lot of time either to really record these because it takes a long time. So I do apologize for some of those time skips, just because life gets very busy. I still love Tolkien, but I mean, man, this takes up a lot of time recording. So if you do enjoy my narrative and recording, as I always say, just keep listening. Try to spread the word of it all. This is more of like my personal project, but I would still really appreciate the listeners and I was gonna say views, but just even if I see a few of you listening, it's really great for me to see that. So man, I can't even say my outro. With that all being said, stay tuned and may the light of Elbereth be with you all. Farewell.